Welcome to another episode of Just Some More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justsomemorefix.com or on Twitter at justsomemorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a rating and review at iTunes or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to talk about exploratory games and hex crawls. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
Michelle Ely from the Starling Tribune, an Arrow TV show fan podcast, part of the Gonna Geek network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other amazing geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to Just More Fix. A couple quick announcements before we get things going as usual. First off, hopefully you guys heard in the last episode that we are going to be releasing a quarterly zine on our Patreon, and that's going to start releasing in April. If you support us at the $5 level, you'll get a physical copy of the zine as well as a PDF, and the $2 level will also come with a PDF as well. So if you guys are interested in getting that zine or getting in on our quarterly zine, if you support us by the end of April, you'll get the first issue, which is Worms, which is a game that we brainstormed during one of our creature feature episodes, and we've ran it several times and had a lot of fun. It's a fun body horror style game with lots of terribleness and parasites and awful badness creature feature stuff. It's been a lot of fun. I think that's the only announcement we have today, because we don't have an Indie RPG Day to announce because we haven't scheduled a nice one, but there will be one coming soon. And I don't know, just to plug real quick, those have been a lot of fun, and we have gotten basically talked about it at the end of the last one. We sort of have formed another small gaming group that is our Indie RPG Day gaming group, which is really cool, right?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, and it's like a group of people playing games together and having fun. And I don't know that gaming group would have came together. I know that gaming group would have came together.
For certain, it would not have come together.
And it's been fun, and it's been cool to expose people to different games, and then also on our end of things to get exposed to new and different gamers, and have a good time. And it's just been a lot of fun. And I guess me and Lacey had talked about the whole experience of this, what it's been, because we've been running them now for probably close to a year now, or at least coming up on it, right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think it was before Gen Con, because I ran Bedlam Hall there in preparation for
Gen Con.
So it's got to be really close to a year.
Yeah, so right around a year, so that would be 12, or I think we missed a month because of Gen Con, so I think right at 11 indie RPG days. And I guess the only reason I mention it here is because it's been a lot of fun, and it's surprised us in a lot of ways, and I think I just want to encourage other people to go out there and do things like that. If you have a gaming store in your area that would support you, I'm sure they would, because it brings more people into the store and it's advocating for games and that kind of stuff. And it's just been a lot of fun, and it's challenged, I know me, and I'm sure it challenged you as well.
Yeah. I hadn't run games for anybody other than our own gaming group.
Right.
So...
And it's just been a ton of fun, and...
Yeah, whatever, I'll run this at the shop. Sometimes I'm like, I didn't even prep this game.
I have a vague idea of what I'm doing.
I read the rules on the way here.
Right. Well, and then this last one, I ran Dogs in the Vineyard, and that's the first game that I've been kind of nervous to run again, since I've kind of gotten over the initial hump of just running for complete strangers or whatever. And I think that's what sort of provoked the thought of how much fun it has been to do this, and to sort of, one, introduce people to games, but also like kind of us as individuals grow as gamers as well. It's just been fun to challenge yourself and do different things and whatever. So I don't know, not just trying to plug what we do, but like it's really fun. And I would just recommend, if you run games, or even if you don't run games, go out there and give it a shot and have fun and introduce some people to new games. And
yeah, and if you have a local gaming store and you're one of those people sitting around lamenting about how you don't have a gaming group, get off your butt, go to your gaming store and run the game. Yes,
because you can't find new gamers if you don't go find new gamers, or just go, post something up. I want to, run this game or whatever. And, yeah, I don't know. It's just been lots of fun. I don't know.
You build it, they will come.
Total Kevin Costner gaming moment there.
Of this story.
Right on. All right, so just not,
RPG baseball.
more games is better, I guess, is the moral of the story here. So go run games and have fun, meet new gamers, run great games, and do good things.
Well, it's always I don't know, just more than that. Like, there's always a shortage of games that aren't D&D to be able to find to play in, you know? And even the people we've gamed with at the shop or, you know, at cons that are hardcore gamers, like, you know, playing D&D regularly or years of RPG experience, they're like, oh, yeah, I read that book, or I looked at it, or I bought that book. It's sitting on my shelf, but I don't have anybody to play it with.
Well, yeah, and then a great example is at HoosierCon. One of the people at the table I said, had you played Powered by the Apocalypse games before? And he said, no, I've got one and I read it, but I never ran it and never played it. So that's why I'm here. And I think part of the reason we don't have, like, it's much easier for us to try new games now is because I feel like for the last 2 or 3 years, we've made a very, very concerted effort to try new games and just throw caution to the wind and let's just see how much of a wreck it can be, right? And I feel like after doing that for that long, that it just made things that much easier to sort of step into things and embrace new games. And then I guess my advice would be, if you want to do that, is I think most people have a lot of books on their shelves they haven't ran, right? And I just decided the next 12 months, I'm going to be at 75% of these games ran or played. And that was my goal. And I made it. And then, of course, Gen Con came and we added more games and the cycle continues. But nonetheless, it still is a thing and it happened and we made it. And I think every time you do it, it definitely gets easier, right? And then it's kind of fun because then you get to see how different games actually... You begin to see the strings of the puppet show for the games, right? Because you get exposed to more. You know what I mean? Enough of that tangent. A little bit of tangent. I guess that's what that's called. Anyway. All right. So today we're going to talk about hex crawls and exploratory gaming. And we have a Hot Springs Island game running right now. And we're about 4 sessions deep into it. And... first off, it's been a lot of fun, but it is a very different style of game than a lot of the other games we run because it is very open world and sandbox. So the premise of Hot Springs Island, in our case, which is sort of the case that's put forward in the book, is that you're sort of shipwrecked or just sort of discover this island and you're sort of marooned there and then you have to find your way off. Now, it's not a very big island because I think each hex is only like 4 or 2 miles or something. It's very small, but there's I think at least 30 some hexes or something, right? There's a fair amount, and each hex has 3 different points of interest. So Hot Springs is a really well put together thing to say first off, right? But there's not a lot of direction behind it. So in my own gaming, I really hadn't played a lot of hex crawl style games. We've played a lot of exploratory stuff where you're kind of wandering around doing things, but not where it was like, go to this hex, explore this hex, go to the next hex necessarily, you know, and a little bit more structure to it, I guess, if that's the right word, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think you have either. I don't want to speak for you, but...
I've never played a hex crawl game at all.
Okay. So, what was the immediate... Like, have you enjoyed the experience so far?
Yes, very much so.
Okay. So, like, why? Like, if you had... And not because of... like mechanics or whatever, but like what specifically is different about this style of hex crawl than the regular OSR D&D style games that we play?
Well, it's better. No. So I'm normally somebody that likes to have a mission or some kind of goal or something like that. I will tell you right now, the entire reason that this game hooked me was the creatures. The flora and fauna in the game are just amazing. They're exploration worthy. They're not just more goblins and here's a forest I didn't really bother to describe. Right. Like, no. It's a very every place I go, there is something happening involving these fantastical creatures.
Going along that same direction, right? If I had told you I'm going to run this Hot Springs game, right, and it's going to be way different, and there's going to be all kinds of weird and different monsters, and there's not going to be a single goblin there or whatever, right? Do you think that would sell you in the same way?
Probably not.
Okay.
No, I mean... You know, I'm always, I'm DTG.
Right down the game, right?
But, and it's always been my thing to say, like, you know, I am excited to play in any game that you're excited to run. Right. But the fact that I get to see And maybe that's part of it too, because there's so many games you sit down and you're like, this is an amazing world. Like I had that with Shadows of Estern, right?
Right.
And can you guys look at the first book? Yeah, but it's not like required reading, you know? It's not like if you don't, then you know, the things, but it gives you a distinct advantage that is an incentive for you to look at the book, first of all.
That's exactly where I was going. So
but secondly, like it's something I get to have and experience. So like, for example, the Cursed Chateau.
Uh-huh.
Amazing pictures, amazing things happening in there. I can't look at any of that book because spoilers.
Right, unless you happen to encounter that one picture where the game master says, "This is what you see," and you see the picture.
But with this, I get my own book before the game even starts that I get to flip through and be like, "Oh, I can't wait to delve into this." So that's
where I was going to go. Is I feel like the field guide and what you mentioned really sort of sets the hook to draw people in, right? Mm-hmm. Because Hot Springs Island is contained in 2 books. Now, you don't have to have what they call the field guide. The Dark of Hot Springs Island is sort of like the Game Master book, right? And it's laid out very well, very friendly for the Game Master, easy to reference, great production, of how it's all laid out and like sort of like information design that goes into it. But the players get a regular like digest size book that has, it's like a journal that's like a travel journal that's kept. It has stories in it and has the different creatures and illustrations and pictures of them and sort of like lays out what you might encounter, right? Now, I definitely agree with what you said about like you get to see the stuff, right? But I also feel like, so you mentioned Shadows of Estern, right? And the artwork for that is tremendous, and the world is amazing.
It's so rich,
right? But here's the thing: I just realized as you were kind of talking about this, is that if you're running a Shadows of Estern game and I have my nose buried in the book and I'm just reading it, right, and I'm absorbing the world and the history of this place, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like that's because of what that book is. That means I'm a little less plugged in versus if you have the field guide and you're thumbing through it. Because there are very relevant things to what could be happening right now where you're trying to find it, right? Mm-hmm. And also, and this is true of Shadows of Estern and lots of other large RPGs, that book is not digestible in bite-sized chunks.
Yeah. Oh, I would make the same argument for like Genesis is another great example.
I agree.
Phenomenal artwork, amazing setting, mm-hmm. great game, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a whole lot.
Right. So whereas with the field guide, you can pick it up and I can open it up and like in terms of like a spread, like the 2 pages that are open to you, almost everything is set up to where it's a 2-page entry. And a longer one, like a journal entry, might be 4 or 5 pages. Mm-hmm. But they're small and digestible and interesting. There's a picture to grab you. So you could just flip through there and find, ooh, what's this creature? That looks really neat. Or you might flip through and see a heading that looks kind of interesting. It's got the name of some kind of weird plant, right? Mm-hmm. But the biggest part of it is it's digestible. So it grabs you and it makes you look at it, right? And it's easy to access. So I can read this thing. It takes 10 minutes and then I'm on to the next thing or whatever, right? Whereas I feel like with larger gaming products, they're more like encyclopedic, I guess, does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. This is written from a narrative descriptive sort of science as opposed to like an analytical,
right.
Like one is like reading the methodology of a piece of research. The other one is like reading someone's conclusions,
right.
Like it's not the part you skip over like, oh my God, I'm drooling and falling asleep right now. Well, just tell me what you found out.
I think I'd even go one step further than that. It's sort of like the difference in my mind between reading a research study about gorillas and reading, Jane Goodall's journal when she was actually in the jungle with the gorillas, right? And there she is, and she writes some note about whatever, right? It's very first person and, gives you advice about things to do or not to do. And then it's got the fun part of the unreliable narrator about what's in there and whatever.
Too.
Yeah.
I was going to mention that. The other thing I will say that's different between those two, this is a hex crawl, but aside from it just being, there is a density to what is going on that is unlike anything I've experienced before.
What do you mean?
So just exactly that. So if I'm exploring in this open, every other scenario I've played, I'm exploring, okay, you travel half a day, this is what happens.
Right.
Maybe there's 1 or 2 encounters on this 2 or 3 day journey. This is... everything is so compact. You said it's not a lot of distance, right? But all of this is jammed into this tiny little space. So there's quite literally a density of encounters. Like you talked about, you're reading the book for another game, and you're immersing yourself in the world, and you're kind of unplugged. But it's more than that, because on this particular, like the Hot Springs Island thing, when you're looking at this journal, there is something that's going to happen while you're standing here. Like, things happen so much faster because everything is so jam-packed into this area. So
I think there is another thing that plays into that a little bit, and maybe you haven't seen it exactly because you're playing in the game as opposed to running it, right? So when you move there's what they call a watch system, is how they track time. So you have poker chips on the table for night, dusk, dawn, and then daytime, right? So every hex is designed that it's one watch to go across that hex. It's basically 4 hours, right? But every single hex then has an encounter. So in the course of an entire day, assuming that you rest for 8 hours for 2 watches, then you have, 4 encounters essentially. So while the book is very packed with encounters and it's very dense and there's lots of stuff in there, I do feel like if you took that watch sort of principle and applied it to any other hex crawl, because there's this tendency to be like, there's an encounter and then we go a little ways and then we rest and then we have another encounter. Whereas in this case, it's encounter. And
I don't know that I would necessarily want it that dense in the other game, but it lends itself nicely to the tropical island theme.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because the amount of wildlife you're talking about is way different than, your Midwestern forest for a hike.
Right. Well, and then it kind of plays into that sort of Isle of the, strange tropical island with weirdness and poisonous creatures and all kinds of strangeness there, right? So one of the things that I had big questions about when I was running it is after about session 2, I started to question, I began questioning after session 2, and then at session 3, I actually asked all of the people playing in the game. I was concerned that there was just a general lack of direction, because I haven't ran many hex crawls and haven't played many hex crawls, right? So my concern was, do you as players feel there's enough happening, enough to do? Do you feel like you need more direction, or are you guys okay with what's happening now in the game? Because I'm happy to run the game that we're playing now if you guys are enjoying that, but I need some feedback to know we're all on the same page with this, right? Mm-hmm. I don't want to be trying to run, I don't know, the landscape scenes of Lord of the Rings when you're traveling from one place to the other, and what you guys really want to be playing is the scene in Helm's Deep, right? Because those are two pretty far apart things, you know what I mean? And so that's what you can't do both in the same game, but this sort of exploratory part of it seems to be the focus, and I wanted to make sure that sometimes you're at a game, you're just like, well, it's kind of fun, and there's nothing else being played, so I'll just sort of hang out, and it's okay. Right? And I don't want to run those games. I don't want to run a mediocre game. Like, well, there's no other game. Yeah.
I would like to be the filler between your games,
right.
Please.
I don't want to be the thing on Netflix that you go to when you can't pick something else. Do you know what I'm saying? So
everything on Netflix.
Well, yeah,
I didn't see what I really wanted. I'm not sure what that would have been. This looks neat.
This is just what I always go with, whatever, it's comfortable, it's familiar.
Tired of shopping.
So... But were there moments where you had to sort of adjust, sort of like, well, in the same way when you watch movies, right? When you sit down to watch a movie, sometimes you're in the comedy gear, and then, this is a drama or an action, and I got to shift into that gear or whatever. Was there a moment of that where you had to sort of like wrap your head around the game and sort of approach it differently because it's a drastically different style?
I think I'm still kind of continually wrapping my head around it in a different style.
Right.
I think it helps that it kind of sets it up to be a, I don't know if I want to use the term like colonizing mission, but basically you're there to strip the wildlife for its resources and funds for the greater good of whatever empire you're from. So I guess colonialism is the perfect term.
Okay.
But I mean, that's built into it. So everything has a value.
Right.
These exotic items, you can, kind of strip them down to their essence and use them to something else. And the fact that everything is new and different creates a hold too. And so I do find myself wondering, like, what am I going to do? Like, what is the actual goal here? But I made a character whose goal is just to find new things and investigate them, basically. So I
did you make that choice as like for character goals intentionally because of this game? Or was it just something that that's the character you wanted to make?
No, I just thought tiny tropical island with all kinds of creatures nobody's ever seen before.
Okay.
I want to find and see and look at them all.
I guess what I'm trying to get to is, would
like
you make
Pokemon catcher scientist?
What I'm trying to get to is, would you have made a different character if I had told you this is just sort of like our regular weird fantasy D&D game?
Probably.
Like, like Lamentation style or whatever.
I probably would have made, like a fighter or a ranger or something.
Less exploratory minded, I
would
guess.
have come at it with the idea of a class as opposed to the idea of a character concept.
Okay.
Because for this, I sat down with this concept in mind and just sort of molded my character around what I wanted that to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe that's a piece of it then, that you came to this game with a more developed character concept as opposed to just...
I had a goal.
Right. Well, what I'm saying, though, is maybe it's more fun because you've put more thought or consideration into your character as opposed to just, well, let's see how long this guy lasts until, we get chopped to bits or whatever.
And right now, all of the character goals are pretty much short term. Like, I don't have a long term... What happens once we get to the end of the
escape the island.
I have no idea. I haven't planned for that at all. Which, as a player, scares me because I like to have goals laid out. Like, I have goals on top of goals. Like, these are my short-term goals. These are my midterm. Much like I approach life.
Right on.
But I'm just kind of rolling with it because it's fun right now.
Right.
And the other thing that is aiding in this particular situation that I don't think is inherent in the game itself is the fact that there are about 6 of us, first of all, which is a, ample gaming group.
Yeah.
But we all have drastically different characters.
Oh, yeah.
And so even when I'm not finding something to do, you're pushing to accomplish this other task. And so not wanting to be alone on a deadly tropical island, I'm going along with you and vice versa.
Yeah, because in this case, we have a character who is basically just out for gold and riches, right? Your character is more about like exploration and discovery.
I would say I'm a biologist, whereas Carrie's character is an anthropologist.
Well, she's totally Dr. Island of Dr. Moreau, because I asked her a couple questions about some things, and I was like, what do you want to pursue with this? Like, and she's like, I'm totally the Island of Dr. Moreau, want to make, mutant creatures and, a terribly awesome character, basically, right? In that kind of weird way. And then we have a faithful miracle worker, priestly sort of character, a magic user who is sort of like conjuring things from other worlds and presenting huge faith dilemmas inside the game.
He's also investigating the origins of his own magic, which is an interesting twist to the magic user that I haven't seen before. So he's like interviewing other magical creatures on the island about the source of their power.
Well, it's been interesting because there have been some questions that have been raised about where does this come from, and that's also partly been provoked with the dialogue between that character and the miracle worker character, because about, are you really evil, or is, how does that actually work? And then who am I forgetting now? So then Lee's character is... I'm
not sure what his goal is.
Yeah.
Like, I know he wanted to go to the mountain and the volcano, but I don't really know why. And he won't come off of whatever his ultimate motive is.
Well, that's that's like an archetype of like that secretive kind of thing. So I guess there's just
he may kill us all. I don't know.
Well, maybe it's just something to point to say if you're going to do this style of game, that while the larger campaign story goal is to explore and find interesting things and have interesting encounters and explore interesting worlds, but also the characters on an individual level need to have some of their own goals. And then, like in any game, if you have a sort of a broad spectrum of character interests, then it makes things better, because not only do you have these interesting experiences where you go explore things, then you have interesting experiences about, well, how do you think we should deal with this situation? Because the large majority of the situations you guys have encountered in Hot Springs have not necessarily been combat oriented, which is really refreshing, because the tables, when you roll up the random encounters, they have a random role for what they're doing and why they're there. And the vast majority of them are not automatically combat related.
Well, and I think a lot of that is because of the kinds of characters we've made.
Yes.
You know, we haven't gone in with any, like, hack and slash, you know.
Right. Well, and then
we have scientists and magic users and missionaries, basically.
Right.
Like,
right. So it's been interesting because a lot of those sort of D&D, Pathfinder, OSR, you know, whatever, that kind of D20 gaming, right, kind of always defaults back to stabbing the bags of experience for the treasure, right? Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, and the way I run my games is that I feel like it's more about an encounter. If you can navigate this encounter successfully, then I still award you experience for it. You don't have to defeat the monster, so to speak.
You've overcome
exactly.
the presenting obstacle.
And I think that's one big thing to mention in this, because if it is about exploration, well, okay, so in one case, if you're only awarding experience for defeating enemies, right, then that's not exploratory, that's conquest. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's a subtle but distinct difference between the two, because one is conquest, about going somewhere and defeating people, and the other is quite literally just let's go here and explore and see what we find and deal with the situation at hand, right? Because there have been some fights, yes, but the majority of them haven't been that way.
It's a hostile land.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and well then
humans are soft and squishy.
Yeah, you guys are very underpowered for where you're at, and it's been interesting to watch that sort of puzzle happen too. So I don't want to go to I don't want to get like crazy too deep game story about this in the specifics of these cases, right? But do you feel like there's an ideal mix of percentage-wise of like encounters that are not automatically combat but are more likely to lead to combat versus not? Like, is that like a 50-50? Is that a 60-40? You know what I'm saying?
I think if you like any situation we've encountered could lead to combat.
Right.
The fact that it hasn't led to combat is due, I feel like, almost entirely to our way that we have approached it, and just...
That's fair. I agree with that.
Due entirely to my cunning.
It's entirely because of you. So...
Yes, 100%.
Do you think that's more on the game master to sort of show at the beginning that not... like... in a way to sort of like reveal you don't have to go at every one of these encounters with swords drawn? Or is that more on the players necessarily?
I think it's a combination, and it's also on game creator to make some sort of incentive or some sort of personality to your creatures that there's a chance to even use them like that.
Right.
I mean,
there's more happening in the world besides.
It's sort of informed from the top all the way down.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Players obviously on bottom.
Right. So like, well, and to use Hot Springs as an example, you very easily could run this very combat heavy. There's sort of like more or less an evil overlord on the island, and he has lackeys that are at various levels of power that have significant combat abilities, right? Between the combustorinos and the salamanders and stuff. There's a lot of, you know, quite literally firepower to bring to bear. But I don't find that as interesting of a game. If I wanted to run a dungeon crawl, then I just run a, you know, marauding through the dungeon, killing things and getting treasure. So I just felt like it warranted, plus at the quality of it, I felt like it warranted something more than just go stab these things.
The creatures are much more interesting when you can interact with them on another level. Yeah. You know, how can you be like, oh, well, that's pretty, and then I stabbed it, and moving on.
Right.
You know, when you actually get some sort of deeper interaction that adds a level of interest that you don't see with other things. So,
in this game, you've had several encounters with several different kinds of creatures. There's been fire imps and salamanders and some steam imps, a sentient plant and some other things, some ogres or whatever. Have you felt like the encounters were different enough in terms of personality to make it feel like you were actually having different role-playing encounters?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So do you feel like... because I guess what I'm trying to see is like how... is that because of there's a couple different factions, or is it because of the style of encounters or the style of creatures? Is it like, if you had to try and narrow it down, what would you say it is?
Well, I don't know, because the whole thing is happening kind of behind a veil for me. So I don't know how much of that personality is written into how the culture is described in the book, and how much of that is just you adding stuff in. Like, I'm not privy to that part of the process, so I don't know.
Okay. That's fair. Well, I guess, I don't know. I'd have to specifically look at the book, but there are some things that I've definitely added to it to sort of make things more interesting and customized for our table and our sensibilities.
I guess, like, okay, so, like, for example, the Steam Imps.
Yes.
Is it written in the book that they will bet with you about anything?
Yes.
Okay, so
they're like compulsive gamblers.
That makes them uniquely different,
right?
In a way that's super fun.
I agree. Like, it quite literally describes them as compulsive gamblers. Like, they have a gambling problem, And I think it's fun and interesting, and it changes things in a way, right? And there's a lot of other creatures that are in there and factions that are drastically different than that, but sort of compelling in a different sort of way. So
and I think the fact that we have so many players playing this game has really helped that to shine, because at a table with 6 people, odds are one person is going to pick up on something like that. And then, I can use that. And then that changes the tone of the interaction. So, like, with the Steam Imps, I think that Carrie was the first one to really latch onto the idea, you guys are making bets with each other.
Right.
How about you make a bet with me?
Yeah.
And then from that point we saw, okay, well, you guys are just really excited to be betting about things. So then it kind of escalated from there. And then whereas you had the big ogre guys, and I kind of saw one of them basically kind of laugh at one of our compatriots. And then it was kind of me that picked up that ball and ran with it and was like, maybe we can interact with these guys. So now I'm trying to communicate with not the ogres, but the
Night Axe.
The Night Axe ogres. Yeah. So now I'm trying to interact with them. And from that, we've established an entire bartering relationship. Whereas before it might have been either scream and run or try and kill this giant creature, both of which probably would have ended terribly.
Right on. So a lot of these encounters have been all over the place, and there have been a couple different times where your sort of immediate goal or destination has changed, right? So, and there has been some discussion inside the group about where should we go? Where should we be going? And in this example, we have 6 players, right? And there has been some disagreements about the direction to go. Now, obviously, in an exploratory game, on the Game Master side of things, if you've got 6 players and the party splits during the exploratory phase,
that is a nightmare.
That's a disaster, right? I think at that point it's like, all right, if you guys are really going that far apart and don't have a plan to sort of like regroup, like if you have 2 goals that need to be accomplished, okay, that makes sense. But if you're actually just be like, I'm going to the volcano, nope, we're going to the ruins,
right?
Fine, later. At that point, I think you have to break into 2 different games, So there haven't been any major disagreements, right? There's been some table discussion or about what the goal should be and where you guys should go. So do you feel like there's a way to sort of mitigate the analysis paralysis or disagreements about where you should go?
Urgency. You just add a sense of urgency.
As the game master, you put constraints of time. If you spend
too much time arguing, something should show up to kill you.
Okay.
And that's another thing that Hot Springs Island does well, because of
it's a hostile environment.
Yeah. The density of creatures in it is such that, if you stand there too long,
if you're loud in the jungle,
something is going to try and hit you.
Okay, that's fair. I agree.
And that's something I feel like you can incorporate in any game.
Oh yeah, and it's a good when in doubt, have something blow up is sort of the default in the modern or sci-fi game, and it's very true here. So when in doubt, have some marauding creature rampage through. That's fair. I think that's a good idea, because you could very easily go off the rails that way if there's 2 players or characters that are, really drastically opposed to what the other's goals are or whatever.
Maybe I'm an evil GM, I don't know, but if my party split 3 and 3, I would give them a punishing encounter that would probably take 4 or 5 people to overcome. And
if you were all
together or we start over.
The encounter on this side needs a wizard, the encounter on the other side needs a cleric.
There's a reason why you say you don't split the party.
That's
right?
true. That's true.
Because tropes exist for these stereotypes.
Well, then I also don't think that there's anything wrong with the game master saying, "Hey, look, if this is what the plan is, this sort of breaks what we have going here, and I don't know that I can manage this." And I'm sure, in order to share spotlight time among players, but also among groups, then, do you want to sit here for an hour while they have an encounter with the Night Axe and you get to watch, and then vice versa with them with the salamanders and combustorinos? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that at meta level.
But at the same time, that sort of feels like my mom guilt tripping me into doing something. Like, if I really wanted to go that direction that badly, then I just need to find out that it's not going to work.
That's true.
You know, whether that's by me sitting here for an hour and not getting to play because you're dealing with them, or because you send something to kill me on the next encounter. Like, either way, but I don't want you to, like, you know, harangue me into it.
Harangue you. I see where you're coming from, but I also don't think there's anything wrong with the GM saying, are you sure this is what you guys want to do?
Yeah, no, that's fine, you know.
Right. I don't. Yeah, but the guilt trip thing, I think, is a kind of a. You're right there. That's a poor way to go about it. But I do think there's nothing wrong with clarifying and saying, "Are you sure that this is the direction that we want to take the game?" Because you know, we all are aware of what we're doing here, you know. Right. And I think there's a certain value sometimes at a player-to-player and meta level of making interesting decisions to drive the game into cool places, because otherwise no one wants to play, you know, Larry the Clerk RPG, you know, filling out forms. We're here to play an exciting adventure about heroes and disasters and whatever, right?
I mean, I would even say, like, if you're going to go that route and, like, force me into it, I would rather you do it at a game level even and be like, you know, how sometimes in World of Darkness where you're like, okay, well, this person is just going to make a test against the player. Like, I'm going to use my leadership or I'm going to use my charisma and you're going to follow me because I am charismatic and you are not.
Right.
You know, like, the party's coming with me.
Right. Well, that's kind of like...
And I would even be okay with that, honestly. Right. Like, it's kind of a cheap way to do it, but if nothing else is working...
Well, yeah. Well, at a certain point, you got to kind of leverage what you have to make the game work, too. So, right on. All right, so I have a kind of a shifting gears here a little bit. Oh, no, let me back up. I got one more question. Do you think that you could make this style of a game work without the field guide? And not even on a Hot Springs Island game. Like, just in general, a hex crawl exploratory game, whether that was like using the Carcosa book or the Isle of the Unknown book or any of the others.
No, because obviously there are games that are like this that are working.
Right.
But
is this just like the pinnacle of it, or
no? Like, as somebody who's like, I am not usually very big on open exploration games. That's not my jam, and so for me, I would not have been nearly as excited to play this game if it wasn't for the field guide. Yeah.
So do you feel like then now, going forward, after this game, we play it, whatever, let's say you guys get off the island.
Everything else is going to be not as good.
Because this one is so awesome?
Yeah. No, I mean, just like the creatures and the art and the descriptors and the field guide and the encounter density, all of it.
Product, all that stuff set aside, right? Do you feel like if there was another game that we laid out, that the description was sort of something similar, but not specifically using these physical products, that you would be more likely to play it now because of the experience you had with Hot Springs then?
What do you mean, like, similar? Like, I don't want to play another tropical island hex crawl.
No. But so Carcosa is a hex crawl game in Carcosa, right? And there's all kinds of mythos-y badness and terribleness there. But it's fundamentally it's a hex crawl in that sort of a world. Do you feel like you would be more likely to sort of approach that game differently, knowing the fun you had here and how you might change gears?
I want to say yes, but it's got me thinking now that you say that, something I hadn't realized before. Like, there is a lot of kind of alien weirdness to Hot Springs Island, but it's all similar to creatures that exist for the most part. And, like, it's something that I have a grasp of. When you say Carcosa,
right,
it's so strange to me that I almost don't have an interest in exploring it on that level without a goal, because...
Not as relatable?
Right. Okay. Like, I don't have a basis for...
Okay, so... Well,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But, okay, so if I'm just saying Carcosa aside then, something that is just a hex crawl that is... I don't know what it would be, but it would tick boxes for whatever, but it isn't specifically that individual Hot Springs product, right? Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you would be more likely to go to an exploratory game again because of this? Or is it just like a one-off thing, like, this is really cool, and I don't know that I want to go do this again?
It would still have to be really good.
Okay. Like, well, it's fair. You know,
I don't want to do a mediocre exploration game because of this.
Right.
Exploration games are still not my favorite.
Uh-huh.
But I really like this one.
Okay.
You know, and could there, like, I would be willing to try more of them, sure.
Right.
Probably, yeah, I guess I'd be a little more willing to try them because of this game.
Uh-huh.
But I would also go into it with a hefty dose of skepticism that it would not be as good as this one.
Right on. Do you think you'd be more likely to have fun in it, though, knowing that there are ways to change the way you lay out your character so you can set yourself up to succeed? I feel like we do a pretty good job around our table of making interesting, compelling characters or whatever, and some of them are better than others, obviously, but the way you talked about this is it's been specifically different in the way you've made other characters for some of our OSR stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And I think maybe that ties back to why in the Witches game I enjoy that one so much. Me, Carrie, and Lee's characters are all very interesting and kind of interconnected, and it changes the way everything works.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said for limitations. Because I find, like, with D&D, like, there's so many options.
Right.
And so then I get more excited about the pre-prescribed character options than I do about adding the intricacies to my own character.
Okay.
So I think that's why, not entirely, but that's part of the reason why you guys like those characters so much, because it was limiting. Like, you can only be a female, and you can only be some kind of witch, and you can only be, unmarried, and you can only be these things,
It made it narrow and deep as opposed to broad and shallow.
Then you were forced to come up with some other outside of the box things to make your characters unique from each other.
Right. So I have a couple sort of other game-related questions, I guess, to see where this kind of goes. So this game we've talked about is largely a D&D, LOTFP, Pathfinder-y style of game, right? BX, whatever. So we have the Dracula dossier, which is very similar in a way. So the Dracula dossier is
I see what you're getting at here.
Yeah, so...
My mind was like, no, okay, all right.
Right. So the Dracula dossier is a Night's Black Agents game, and Night's Black Agents is basically Jason Bourne meets Dracula, right?
Well, kind of just investigation games in general sort of have that similar hex crawl feel, because it's like, go here, here's one designated encounter. If you investigate, you may find these one or two other things. Then you go to the next place.
There's no actual hexes on a map, but the concept is still set. Right. And you go find information that puts you in danger. That means you have to get more information. Rinse, wash, repeat, right?
Interesting to mull over.
Yeah. So that's Ken Hite. That's not me. I heard it from him, and he's totally right.
Kind of snacking on that now.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept. And I think in terms of those style of games, knowing that sort of formula helps you sort of progress things through in an interesting way, because there's a sort of back and forth that happens with that, right? Mm-hmm. But... So in the Dracula dossier case, there is a director's manual, which is very dense and thick, and there's a lot of things in there, plots and characters and organizations, but it all centers around Dracula being this sort of mastermind, right? And along with it comes in this case, a version of the field guide. It's the Dracula dossier unredacted, and it's a novel with footnotes and notations in it and stuff like that. So... I know you really, you're a giant Dracula fan, so it's sort of like a gimme anyway, but...
I would play that in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Well, but do you feel like it's much more engaging because of having that dossier or the field guide, in this case?
Yeah. 100%. Like, that was the first time I'd ever seen, like, a player-specific companion.
Right.
And it's an amazing idea.
Right. And it's yours. It's an in-game, at the table. Yeah.
And you can reference it. Now, so the field guide borders for me, but the Dracula dossier is a huge chunk of material.
Yeah.
A huge chunk of material. So in that aspect, like, I like it, but I almost feel like it's so much. Mm-hmm. You can't hand me that at the first session and then also expect me to play the game. Like, I need time to
digest it.
But maybe that's what it is. I mean, I guess you're an agent, and all of a sudden, here you go, you have this book and also your mission. So, like, that's how you have to do it. But
one of the unintended benefits of having those materials at the table is, inevitably you end up in scenes where it doesn't involve everybody. So it gives the people that are not involved in the immediate scene something to do that is relevant immediately to the game, right? So they can be going through it or whatever, whether that's in the Hot Springs case or the Dracula dossier case. And in the Dracula dossier side of it, you don't need to know everything in there. What I like about it in that case is you can just flip through and find something that looks like it catches your eye, and then the game master can just use that thread and pull on it all night long. Mm-hmm. And so you can use as much or as little as you want to pull out of that book. It's really, really well put together and well designed. So knowing that those materials are really sort of what set these sort of sandboxy style games onto another level, right? Do you feel like if you made your own home campaign hex crawl game that you could make your own sort of like zine style play aid at the table that would be interesting and compelling?
Could I? Probably. Would I? It's a lot of work.
Right.
And I think that's why those games are worth the money that you pay for them, because that is a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And I don't expect to sit down at the table and have someone have put that much work into it for me when I sit down.
Right.
If you did, like, my mind would be fucking blown.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, because
this is
generally, like, we end up with like some small props and that kind of stuff, or you know, like forms and some interesting things, but nothing that would nearly ascend to that level.
Yeah, the level of
So I saw that just recurred to me. I saw it today, actually. Kind of funny that I saw it today. Someone was putting together a Kids on Bikes game, and they made a pamphlet for the city that the Kids on Bikes game is in. And it was interesting because it was put out by that town's chamber of commerce or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's doable. Like a trifold pamphlet. Like, that's not...
I think this one had about 12 pages to it, right?
Oh, that's not a pamphlet.
But it wasn't like it was. Every page wasn't wasn't full text.
Like a brochure,
right? Well, like each page might have 2 paragraphs on it or something, right? You know, and then they went through with it in another font or whatever, like a handwriting kind of font, and drew things out in red and had like someone had written on it or whatever, and that was the aid that they used for that game or whatever, right? And it kind of had clues you could grab onto or not or whatever, you know. And it was just very interesting because I realized. Granted, no one wants to write a book specifically to bring to because if the game doesn't go or whatever, that kind of sucks, and your ideas may not take flight or whatever, because you're essentially running the very first playtest of whatever this thing you're making is, right? But in that case, it was only 12 pages, and I would estimate if you put all the text together, it's probably like 2 or 3 pages, like, you know, 8.5 by 11 pages of text. So it wasn't huge, but it was some work, you know, and it looked good. And I thought it was like, wow, that's really, really cool. But it's a way to do it in a game at your table that is, one, accessible. It's exciting because you're excited about this game. Clearly you made this thing. That's pretty badass, right? And then, also it's a really cool way to sort of deliver that information to your players where they can use it or not as sort of, you know, so. I don't know. It just occurred to me as I asked you that, and I realized, I did see that today. It's an
interesting way to introduce locations too, because as I'm thinking about it, like I've done that much work for like, for example, my Tales from the Loop game. Like I had that many locations. I looked up pictures for different ones. I had a layout of the local junkyard, like those kinds of things, and it would be interesting to make like basically it's an advertisement brochure, like of the key locations of the town with a 1 or 2 paragraph blurb about what that location is. And I don't think that would be that bad.
Oh man, I didn't even think about it. I didn't even realize until just now when I
also secretly think it would be a lot of fun to have like a silly like YouTube commercial that was like 1980s style, like come on down to Buster's Arcade.
So. Several years ago, I was running a vampire LARP, Mind's Eye Theater. Oh, yeah, and we made newspapers. Mm-hmm. So I got a scan of a front page and a back page of a newspaper, of the local newspaper, and then I sectioned out articles.
And they were so amazing.
Yeah.
Like, it was the coolest LARP prop I've ever received. And it was useful because it had like actual events that happened, and then you could read the articles and be like, what's really going on there? Like, which one of these elders was really behind this weird headline?
Well, and on my side of things, some of those things I wrote on my own, right? And what I generally did was I would take an article and I would make the headline and I might write 3 paragraphs. So it wasn't a huge amount of text, right? And then I would just use sample text of something, and players generally knew once I get to this point, the rest of this is just gibberish. It doesn't matter, but I've gotten the gist of what's happening. But also, so on an average page, right? So I would print these out, and they were printed as, I think, 11 by 14, if I remember correctly. So I had that sort of like longer style of paper, right? And it had a front and a back to it. And then there would be between 4 and 6 articles that would be in there. And I would also take articles from other things and just put them in there randomly. So you really wouldn't know necessarily what was real and what wasn't. And then also when players would do things with their downtime actions and different things of Fallout, I would put that in there as well. And it was a really great way to engage players that aren't immediately doing something in the same way that the field guide does as well, but it also delivers that information and gets them to sit there and look at something and then not just read it, but also be thinking, what do I do with this? Who is behind this? And all that kind of stuff. So, World of Darkness game, it's perfect.
Well, and it makes sense in kind of the, like the Men in Black with the National Enquirer, right?
Yeah.
Like, you could very easily roll it over to some kind of sci-fi paranormal thing as well.
Right. Well, and to be honest, it's not that hard. And there are a lot of free resources online that you can use to do this kind of stuff, whether it's with GIMP, which is a sort of like Photoshop program, or Scribus, which is a actual layout program, both of which are free. And both of which are pretty intuitive, and with about an hour's worth of time, you can have enough to be dangerous and do what you need to do. I'm no expert. I know enough to sort of, fiddle around and really break something, but not enough to like make a living at it, right? But it doesn't take that much effort to sort of be able to do that and cross into that next level.
For something like Adventure Hooks, like, you're already surfing the web looking for weird things.
Yes.
Anyway, like, just look for weird news headlines, and now you've made a magazine cover out of them and come up with 2 or 3 different plots for those things that are on the cover, and whichever ones your players latch onto, there you go. You're off to the races.
I sort of like diverted into this sort of like prop making thing, but
now we're talking about player guides.
Right, but like, well, there are lots of, because you shouldn't, I would not advocate for you to be stealing artwork and that kind of stuff, right? Because that's other people's creative endeavors. But there are lots of free resources online.
I get what you're saying, but at the same time, if it's at your home table and you're literally not doing
it's
anything else with it, like,
right. Slightly different
I'm
argument,
not going to
right?
pay somebody
but if
$20 every time I want to play a game session.
Right. But if that is a concern for you, there are loads of free fonts that you can find. There are, if you go to Wiki Commons,
which is
Wikimedia Commons,
mind blowing to me, because I didn't know until sometime earlier this year that like fonts were a thing. Like, I mean, it makes sense in my head now that somebody came up with that, and like is getting credit for them. But if you had asked me like, oh yeah, that copyrighted font, I've been like, that's not a thing. They're just letters.
Right.
But they're a specific kind of letters.
But there's lots of resources out there, like Wikimedia Commons is an easy one that has loads of open source and public domain photos and all kinds of stuff that you can use. So there's lots of things out there and lots of resources that you can use that are completely license free and royalty free and all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of cool things out there. So I have one last question for you to close us off. As you've mentioned before in some of my World of Darkness games that I run, which are very sort of sandboxy, right? That you sort of feel like you're stumbling around not knowing what to do. Mm-hmm. And I totally acknowledge that, because in a World of Darkness sense, what I like to do is build a city or a world for you to step into, and then you figure out what buttons you want to push. And there's a lot of options, so you got to kind of explore and find those things, right? So my question is, have you found any key differences in sort of like a sandboxy kind of a way or an exploratory way? I realize there's 2 big different genres between like a hex crawl in an OSR sense versus what a World of Darkness kind of sandbox world, right? But are there any parallels or things that you think of that might make you look at the other one differently now?
I hadn't thought about that at all until right this second.
We got time to talk about it. It's just something that occurred to me as we were talking about this, because it's one of those things where I like to consider one game that you're playing in a certain genre, and then how do you apply that logic to a different style game or a different genre or a different time period, and see what interesting things kind of come out of considering it in a different way.
I just don't know that the 2 really relate in my brain. Like, I'm feeling like there's so much more physical challenge happening with one.
Right.
And not as much social. But we've interacted with lots of different cultures and stuff, but it's not, I don't know, it just doesn't feel the same.
Okay, so let me frame it slightly differently then, right? So in the one case, your critique of some of the World of Darkness games that I've been is that you felt like you've been stumbling around the dark, not knowing what to do, right? Mm-hmm. And so I feel like in the same way that could very easily happen in a Hot Springs game.
But it's different, because the way that I feel like I'm stumbling around in a Hot Springs game is in a way that is physical. Okay. And that's an easy thing to perceive. Right. So when you're fumbling around like an idiot in a physical world, you're tripping over things. Or, like, right. Things are, you are forcing encounters upon yourself. Mm-hmm. When I'm stumbling around in a social sense, it is just frustrating. It's like being at a party where you don't know anyone. Okay. And that is alienating and frustrating in a way that is not fun. Right.
Okay, that's fair. So knowing that, do you feel like, so the way that because that potential could exist in this Hot Springs game, right? But because you describe it as sort of being this more physical kind of a way you see it, you're more, I feel like you guys have been, at the table, player-wise, you've been much more proactive about seeking things out, right? Do you feel like that knowing that you could apply that same logic to the World of Darkness and then maybe approach it slightly differently to where you're not so frustrated and maybe you're finding a different way to approach the game? Does that make sense?
No, I feel like the problem is just like in World of Darkness, one, you need to have goals, which we kind of talked about with this, but two, the player that you're creating needs to be already connected into this environment in some fashion in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, and that's not just on me, that's on the person
I agree.
running the game too.
Right.
You need to involve them.
Right. Well, and that's a problem.
Going.
That's a problem with first session games, especially. I hadn't considered it that way. In a social, political heavy game, those first sessions are always hard because we've got to build and establish a world. Then we've got to connect everyone to it.
I thought that is something that the new vampire system does really well by pulling those things out of that kind of Trail of Cthulhu system where you have these different anchors.
Right.
And, you're making this web
that relationship
of social interaction. Yeah. So you're automatically hooked in and... like as a storyteller, you understand what things are important to me out the gate, and
you've written it down, quite literally. You've written it down on paper in front of you,
and I've basically created some NPCs for you to draw into the thing that you already have created. So that makes it easier for you, but it also removes a lot of my frustration because then I'm not stumbling around.
Well, I totally agree. I think in any World of Darkness game I run going forward, whether it's V5 or Wraith or V20, whatever it is, we'll always use that relationship map now.
And there's been some of that with allies and contacts, but there's a difference in when you assign something specifically and draw out how it fits into the world and just say... it's different between it's like actually calling it into existence instead of saying that it's a thing somewhere. But
also when you write it on your paper and then maybe I jot it down on my notes as a game master, that's one thing. That's what we've done in the past, right? But now we're writing it on the table in front of everyone and everyone sees it. So then also when I'm trying to search for something and I'm not sure what to do, now I have a sort of, relationship map quite literally on the table with all these lines drawn across it. And I think it makes it easier to make connections because you can quite literally see them spelled out in front of you, right?
Well, and it's connecting the other players at the table too.
Right.
So maybe we all had a contact who was a drug dealer before, but mine's name is Steve and yours is Mickey and his is Allison, but now we're like, oh, well, I see you have a drug contact and his name is Steve. I probably have the same guy.
Right.
So
There's
now
no
we're
need to
both connected to Steve. Right.
Yeah.
And that connects us in a way as well.
Right. Oh, I do have one final question. You've already said your biggest fear for this game is what happens after, right? So quite literally, what happens after? Is this game going to lose its interest once you guys have the opportunity to leave the island? Or does it need to be then, or is the solution then?
I don't even know. Is there going to be an opportunity to leave? Am I going to have to make a raft of coconuts? Am I ever even going to have the motivation to leave?
Right.
Because as a character, I don't know that I ever really would. My goal is to, I'm basically like a biologist.
Right.
Why would I ever want to leave an island full of all this life? Right. There's an endless amount to study.
Okay, so let's take it outside of the context of that character then, right? So in a really good exploratory hex crawl game, where do you go after that world has been explored? Do you continue to just drill down deeper into the world, or do you go somewhere new? Or do I
just feel like once you're in a hex crawl game, probably the rest of the globe is made up of hexes as well, and so I leave and go to another hex.
Another place. And,
now I take to the ocean, and the ocean will be made of hexes as well.
Well, it's a valid... I mean,
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would assume maybe at some point we would get off the island and that would just be the end of the game.
Right.
Like
the epilogue to it is that you finally escape.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Or we all die. I'm much more certain that we're going to die.
You're all going to die. It is not a, forgiving
it's in
world.
the highly likely category. I feel like this turned into more of an interview than us talking to each other.
Well, my thought with it is that the way... I know you don't have a lot of experience with hex crawls, but it also, in that this is sort of new, that it... there's certain insights and things that you consider and you realize by, from doing this. Mm-hmm. And I was just curious as to sort of where it would lead, I guess. Do you know what I mean? So
an investigation game is different. I will say that World of Darkness, no, that won't change how I do anything. But I think that thought changes how I approach investigation games as a player.
Right.
Because I've always been maybe a little bit, like, worried.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that I'm going to the wrong place and I'm not going to find the right clues and that I'm never going to be able to solve the mystery.
Right.
But, like, approaching it like a hex crawler, I'm like, there's literally no wrong choice. It's just something different is going to happen in this hex than the other hex.
There's different levels of danger, but
I feel like I don't want to say relax because it's still very intense, but, you know, approach it with a more of a sense of exploration than previously. Yeah, it's a cool thing.
Very cool. Right on. So, quick Gonna Geek promo for Game Life Balance US. Game Life Balance US Podcast 58. Author Blake J. Harris talks Oculus, Facebook, and the VR revolution. Cody interviews author Blake J. Harris, who recently released his new book, The History of the Future. That's Oculus, Facebook, and the revolution that has swept virtual reality. In this podcast, Harris dives into the dramatic, larger-than-life true story behind the founding of Oculus and its quest for virtual reality. He also talks about how he got his hands on the story, the twists and the turns he encountered, and what's next for virtual reality. So you can check them out. That's Game Life Balance US, episode 58, and you can find them on the Gonna Geek Network. Well, I think that'll do it for us. We'll wrap this one up. If any of you out there have had some really awesome experiences with either making cool sort of play aids that were larger than just, you know, handouts and that kind of stuff, more something along the lines of a zine or a pamphlet or an infomercial, something like that, let us know so we can check it out and sort of any insights that you have gleaned from doing that. Also, if there's any other awesome hex crawls or exploratory games, you know, hit us up and let us know about those, as we have found a couple of these and they've been a lot of fun for us to check out and try. If you like what we do here at Just One More Fix, you can support us at patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix and join the other awesome Patreon supporters like Alistair H., Tiziano Furlano, Simon McNair, Alan White, and the OG Todd Olson. If you support us there, you can get access to all of our raw audio feeds and pre-shows, as well as our quarterly zine that's going to be coming out this April. So if you want access to the first of our quarterly zines, if you support us at Patreon by the end of April, which would be April 30th, not the 31st, you can get access to all of that. I think that'll do it for us, and we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can support us at patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix or follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.